There seems to be a mistake, sir. We're going to need you to move to accommodate one of our VIP passengers, Jessica, the flight attendant said with a thin smile. Her tone was coated in politeness, but the way she looked at Danielle made the real message clear. It wasn't a request. This seat is typically reserved for our platinum members, she continued, her voice just a touch sharper now. You don't belong here. Behind her stood Brandon Whitmore, dressed in a tailored navy suit and tapping his luxury watch with exaggerated impatience. His eyes flicked back and forth between Danielle and the seat she occupied, 1A, as if silently demanding that reality rearrange itself to fit his expectations. I always sit there, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. It's practically mine. Danielle looked up, confusion and quiet disbelief washing over her face. She had done everything right. Booked early, paid in full, arrived on time. She was a platinum member, and yet somehow her very presence in that seat was being treated like a problem that needed to be fixed. Calmly, she reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, sliding out her platinum membership card and offering it without hesitation. I am a platinum member, she said evenly, and this is my assigned seat. Jessica's smile tightened further. A flicker of surprise passed across her face, quick, almost involuntary, but it was gone in a flash, replaced by a kind of steely resolve. I understand, ma'am, but this particular seat is usually reserved for one of our more established travelers, she said, motioning subtly to Brandon. Mr. Whitmore is one of our most frequent and loyal platinum clients. The implication couldn't have been clearer. Regardless of Danielle's status, of her ticket, of the card in her hand, she wasn't who they were expecting in that seat. Passengers nearby began to take notice. Phone screens started rising quietly over the backs of headrests. A few whispers floated through the cabin. The air shifted, heavier now, crackling with quiet tension. What the flight crew didn't realize was that this small, seemingly simple act of discrimination was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything, not just for them, but for the entire airline. Because the man sitting in 1B, quietly observing the entire exchange, wasn't just anyone. He was Sylvester Stallone. And the fate of every person involved had just landed squarely in the hands of the wrong man to underestimate. This story is one of those rare moments where karma doesn't knock politely. It boards first class and takes a seat right next to you. Have you ever been treated unfairly just because of how you looked? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in standing against prejudice and injustice, hit that subscribe button right now and type justice along with where you're watching from in the comments. Let's be louder than silence. In this weather, the morning air at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta carried a kind of chilled heaviness that settled deep in your bones. Sylvester Stallone moved through the entrance quietly, with the ease of a man who had spent his life walking into rooms where people expected him to be someone else. Dressed in a gray hoodie under a worn leather jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and plain black jeans, he looked like any other older man catching an early flight. No entourage, no designer luggage, no flash. Just a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a mind preoccupied with memory. He wasn't flying for press or a Hollywood deal or to promote another sequel. This trip was different. One of his oldest friends, Mickey Fazio, a Bronx native who once gave him a cot and a peanut butter sandwich when he had nowhere to sleep, had died of a stroke. Stallone was flying to Los Angeles to speak at the memorial. It was the kind of trip that makes a man quieter, more observant, more aware of how fast time passes and how easily people are forgotten. That morning, he didn't want to be Rocky or Rambo or Sly. He just wanted to sit in his assigned seat, reflect a little, maybe read a few notes he'd prepared for the eulogy, and get through the day. The gate agent barely glanced at his ID. "First class, seat 1B, the young man mumbled, too busy sipping iced coffee and tapping a screen. Stallone nodded and murmured, "Thanks, champ," more out of habit than engagement. As he stepped onto the Skylux Airlines Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the plush interior looked more like a hotel lounge than an aircraft. Cream-colored leather, glass partitions, LED accent lighting, and champagne already being poured into long-stemmed flutes. He found his seat, 1B, by the window, and noticed someone already sitting in 1A, the aisle seat. A young black woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing a faded red Howard University sweatshirt, dark jeans, no makeup, no accessories, just a sturdy carry-on tucked beneath her seat and a well-worn paperback novel in her hands. She looked up and offered him a polite smile, her eyes warm but cautious. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, then returned to her book. She had that quiet presence, not shy, but thoughtful. He could tell she didn't expect to be noticed, and didn't need to be. And he liked that. As more passengers began boarding, first class started to fill with the usual mix of suit-wearing consultants, influencers in sunglasses, and hedge fund managers already typing away on their MacBooks. That's when the flight attendant, Jessica, appeared. Early 30s, crisp uniform, practiced smile. She paused the moment she laid eyes on the young woman in 1A, her pleasant expression tightening like she'd caught a whiff of something off. "Ma'am," Jessica said with a syrupy tone, "are you sure this is your assigned seat?" The young woman looked up calmly and replied, "Yes, it is." She pulled her phone from her pocket and displayed her digital boarding pass. Jessica leaned in to read it, her eyebrows slightly raised. I see. And you're a platinum member?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I travel every other week for work." Jessica hesitated. "Could I see your member card?" There was no smile now, just suspicion beneath a thin veil of procedure. From his seat, Stallone tilted his head slightly and watched. The exchange was civil, but there was something in Jessica's tone, something under the surface that didn't sit right. He had heard that tone before, many years ago, directed at people who didn't look the part. The young woman calmly retrieved her card and handed it over. Jessica glanced at it, lingered longer than necessary, then nodded and walked off. "Just verifying," she said. 5 minutes passed. Then the man arrived. Brandon Whitmore, tall, white, late 30s, reeking of money and entitlement, entered first class like he owned the jet. He wore a navy suit, camel trench coat folded neatly over one arm, and carried a Louis Vuitton briefcase. "Ah," he announced, eyes locking on 1A, "my usual seat." He stopped in front of the young woman, blinked twice like he couldn't believe his eyes. "I think there's been a mistake. I always sit here." She looked up. "This is 1A, right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "but that's my seat." "I always fly Skylux on Thursdays. Everyone knows that." Jessica reappeared on cue. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted him warmly. "Welcome back." Then with a glance toward the young woman, she added, "We're just working to resolve a little confusion." Stallone's jaw clenched slightly. He could see where this was going. Within moments, Trevor, the flight supervisor, arrived. clean-cut, overconfident, clipboard in hand. "Good morning," he said. "I understand we've got a seating issue. Can I see your documents again, Miss—" "Harper," she replied. "Danielle Harper." She handed over her boarding pass and Platinum member ID again. Trevor studied them, then said, "Yes, but see, this particular seat is generally reserved for high-value travelers who request it." He nodded toward Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore flies with us weekly. We like to keep our regulars comfortable." Danielle blinked. "So I'm not a regular?" she asked. "I've flown with Skylux 8 times in the last 3 months. This is my seat. It's on my pass." Trevor's smile dimmed. "We're asking if you'd be willing to relocate to 4C. Still first class, of course." Danielle shook her head. "No, thank you. I chose this seat for the legroom. I booked early. I'm staying here." The tension in the cabin thickened. A few passengers peeked over their shoulders. Brandon sighed dramatically. "We're going to be late," he muttered. "She clearly doesn't understand how this works." Trevor nodded once and muttered, "Security will resolve this." Stallone leaned forward. "Hold on a second," he said, his voice quiet but unmistakable. Everyone turned. "Is there a reason you're trying to move her when she has every right to sit there?" Trevor stiffened. "Sir, we're handling this according to our policies." "Are you?" Stallone asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, she booked the seat, she paid for it, and she followed every rule you gave her. So again, what's the real reason you want her out?" Jessica looked uncomfortable. Brandon looked annoyed. Trevor looked irritated. Just then 2 security guards stepped onto the plane. Both young, both large, both visibly annoyed that they had to be here. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one said, without greeting or explanation. "Excuse me?" Danielle asked, standing halfway. "What am I being removed for?" "We don't need to explain," the second guard snapped, grabbing her arm. She resisted instinctively. The first guard shoved her back into her seat with unnecessary force. She gasped, and her head hit the armrest. The cabin went silent. Stallone stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, just with quiet, deliberate weight. "That's enough," he said. One of the guards turned. "Sir, sit down. This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Stallone replied. "I watched you assault that young woman, who's done absolutely nothing wrong. You think because she's young and black and dressed simply that she doesn't belong up here? That she doesn't count?" The guard took a step forward. "Sir, if you don't sit—" Before he could finish, Stallone blocked his advance with one hand and stepped into him with just enough pressure to send him off balance. The second guard lunged. Stallone moved fast, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and sent him to the floor with one clean sweep of the foot. Passengers gasped. Phones were already out. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Oh my God, that's Sylvester Stallone." The first guard scrambled to his feet, red-faced, but made no move to continue. Stallone turned back to Danielle, helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling. "I'm okay." Jessica's face had turned ghostly white. Trevor stood frozen. Brandon looked like he wanted to vanish. Stallone looked around the cabin and said, "She's not going anywhere. Neither am I." Within an hour, the video hit 1 million views. But for now, the man in 1B just stood there, calm, steady, and completely unwilling to let another act of quiet discrimination go unanswered. The plane was still on the tarmac when the incident turned from private disgrace to national outrage. Within 20 minutes of Stallone's quiet but forceful stand, 3 different videos of the confrontation were uploaded online, each from a different angle, and each showing the same undeniable truth. A young black woman being physically mishandled for sitting in the seat she had legally booked, and an older man standing between her and the injustice, only to be threatened himself. The twist no one expected was that the man in 1B wasn't just another passenger. He was Sylvester Stallone, and by the time the airport's operations team caught wind of what had happened, the internet already knew. Inside the Skylux corporate offices in Chicago, the first to raise the alarm was an intern on the PR team who saw the footage trending on TikTok and Reddit. Guys, he stammered into the bullpen, I think we've got a situation." His supervisor waved him off until the words, "Stallone tackled security to protect a black woman," popped up on CNN's breaking news sidebar. From there, it spiraled. Phone calls lit up the comms line to the CEO's office, and by the time the VP of Brand Risk stormed into the boardroom, where senior leadership was preparing quarterly forecasts, the video had already passed 2 million views. Richard Langford, Skylux Airlines CEO, stared at the footage on his iPad with a blank expression. The audio captured every word, every gesture, and every moment of silence that now screamed volumes. Jessica, the flight attendant, had stood by while 2 security guards used force. Trevor, the onboard supervisor, had called security before even attempting a second review of the boarding pass. And Brandon Whitmore, the entitled regular, had said nothing but entitlement. But what really hammered the nail into the coffin was Stallone's voice as he stood tall and said, "You think because she's young and black and dressed simply that she doesn't belong here?" No actor could have delivered that line with more authenticity, because it hadn't been a line. It had been real. Langford put the tablet down slowly, the weight of $1 billion brand crashing down on his chest. "Do we have confirmation it's really him?" The chief of communications nodded grimly. "Facial recognition software, media contacts, and, frankly, the fact that every entertainment outlet on Earth is now running the story confirms it. It's him." Langford muttered something under his breath. "Someone get me Stallone's agent. I want to issue a public apology immediately. No, wait, not his agent. Him. Get me him." Back at Hartsfield-Jackson, the chaos had calmed, but the energy inside the terminal had shifted dramatically. Stallone and Danielle had been escorted off the plane, not forcibly this time, but with a security team that walked 10 steps behind them instead of ahead. No handcuffs, no commands, just a trail of cameras and stunned silence. They were taken to a private lounge where Stallone sat stiffly on a leather sofa, phone in hand, eyes locked on the live news feed, showing stills from the video that now defined their day. Danielle sat beside him, a bottle of water in her hand, unopened. "I still don't get it," she said quietly. "How did you know to step in? You could have just sat there. Most people would have." Stallone looked over, his voice rough but steady. "Most people would have. But I'm not most people. I've been watching this happen for decades. In airports, restaurants, boardrooms. I've seen women like you get treated like you're not supposed to exist in certain spaces. That ends when someone says no." Danielle looked down at her hands. "They didn't even look at my name. They didn't ask a question. They just assumed." "That's the problem," he said. "They assumed. And when people assume long enough, they start believing it's policy." Moments later, Stallone's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Stallone, came a voice on the other end. "This is Richard Langford, CEO of Skylux Airlines. I just saw the footage. First and foremost, I want to apologize." "Save it," Stallone interrupted, calm but cold. "You didn't see it happen. You let it happen." "Sir, I take full responsibility. We've placed the crew on administrative leave, and—" "I don't care about leave," Stallone said. "I care about change, real change, not press statements." Langford hesitated. "What do you propose?" "You'll hear from my team, and hers," Stallone said, glancing at Danielle. "We're not interested in PR. We're interested in principle." By the time the phone call ended, media trucks were already circling the terminal like sharks. Stallone put on his sunglasses, turned to Danielle, and said, "Let's give them something worth reporting." They walked out together side by side. He didn't shield her from the cameras. He didn't pose. He just walked at her pace, refusing to let the moment become about him. The story had found its shape, and it wasn't about a movie star defending a stranger. It was about a company that had judged a woman for how she looked and got judged in return by the world. That evening, on Anderson Cooper 360, the headline read, "Stallone steps in, airline faces backlash after VIP assault incident." Clips played across every major network. Meanwhile, Skylux's stock began to dip, 3%, then 6%, and by morning, down 11%. Investors were panicking. Board members were demanding emergency meetings. Social media trended with hashtags like #Justice for Danielle and #Rocky Rises. An online petition demanding the firing of all involved staff passed 100,000 signatures within 12 hours. Celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens voiced their anger and support. Even President Carter's granddaughter tweeted, "Sylvester Stallone showed America what standing up really looks like." Danielle woke up the next morning to 300 voicemails, most from strangers, some from her job asking if she was okay. She hadn't slept much. The whirlwind of attention was dizzying. She'd spent most of her adult life trying to stay invisible, to not stir the pot, to not make a scene. And now, the whole world had seen her in one. That same morning, Stallone sat in a private meeting with two of his longtime advisors and an attorney. He laid out a plan, not for revenge, but for reform. "We're going to demand a full review of Skylux's first-class boarding policy, their employee training protocols, and their record of customer complaints based on race and appearance," he said. "And if they won't meet those terms, we go public with everything." His attorney nodded. "They'll cave. The footage is already viral. They're hemorrhaging credibility." "We're not doing this to punish," Stallone said, voice steady. "We're doing this to make sure Danielle Harper is the last woman who has to explain why she belongs." Back at Skylux headquarters, Langford sat in front of his own board, trying to explain what had happened. But he had no defense, only shame. One of the directors, an older black woman who had stayed silent during the opening statements, finally spoke. "The worst part," she said, "is that it took a celebrity to make you pay attention. What if that had been me? What if that had been my daughter?" Silence answered her. When Langford reached out to schedule a second call with Stallone and Danielle, the actor made one thing clear. "You don't talk to me without talking to her. You treated her like she didn't belong. Now she's leading the conversation." Danielle joined the call, voice calm but firm. "You want to fix your reputation? Start by fixing your policies, and maybe next time, train your people to see a person before they see a stereotype." Stallone smiled. The girl from seat 1A didn't need anyone to speak for her anymore. 2 weeks after the incident, the Skylux boardroom in downtown Chicago no longer resembled the cold, glass-walled monument to corporate ego that it once was. The company's logo behind the CEO's chair had been temporarily covered with a whiteboard. On it, in dry erase marker, someone had written, "Accountability begins when excuses end." The atmosphere in the room was thick, not with cigar smoke or celebration, but tension, uncertainty, and shame. The leadership team, most of whom had weathered mergers, market crashes, and hostile takeovers, looked as though they'd aged a decade overnight. No one touched the coffee. No one made small talk. The lights dimmed, and all attention shifted towards the large screen at the front. The video began playing. Not the viral phone clips that had dominated the news, but a carefully edited sequence of internal footage, body cam recordings from the 2 security guards, audio logs from flight attendant radios, even the plane's onboard surveillance footage, which had been subpoenaed after public outcry reached its peak. In 4K clarity, the board watched the exact moment Jessica questioned Danielle Harper's seat. The deliberate pause when she reviewed the valid boarding pass, the raised eyebrow, the unspoken doubt. They watched Trevor mutter into the radio before even consulting the manifest. They watched security arrive, ignore protocol, and escalate without reason. And then the turning point. Stallone's voice cutting through the rising tension, his face composed but fierce, and finally the quick, decisive movement that brought 2 trained officers to the floor, not out of aggression, but necessity. As the final frame lingered, Danielle Harper brushing herself off as Stallone helped her up, the room fell silent. Then came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Stallone entered first, dressed in a dark navy suit, no tie, sleeves rolled just enough to show the watch he never took off, a gift from his late father. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. Behind him was Danielle Harper, wearing a fitted blazer, her Howard University lapel pin catching the light as she took her place at the table. And then, Elise Thomas, Stallone's longtime attorney and fixer, whose very presence signaled this meeting was not just for show. Langford, the CEO, stood to greet them. "Thank you both for coming. We hope to—" "We're not here for hope," Stallone interrupted. "We're here for change." Danielle placed a slim folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside is a proposed reform package. It includes a mandatory bias training initiative, complete restructuring of your VIP policy, and full transparency on disciplinary action taken after the incident. A board member leaned forward. "And if we accept this, what do we get in return?" Danielle looked him dead in the eye. "You get a second chance at public trust." Stallone added, "And you get to keep your planes in the air." Outside that boardroom, the world hadn't moved on. Public pressure had mounted. Investors were restless. Skylux stock had dropped 17% before slightly rebounding. Customers had canceled memberships in droves. Major media outlets continued covering the story with a ferocity usually reserved for political scandals. Talk show hosts applauded Stallone's restraint and Danielle's quiet strength. Church sermons quoted the moment when Stallone said, "You treat her like she doesn't belong. You're treating us all the same way." It had become more than a viral moment. It was now a cultural benchmark. In the days that followed the board meeting, Skylux announced an unprecedented move: a 48-hour total service suspension to conduct company-wide training in partnership with civil rights educators and behavioral scientists. No flights, no service, no exceptions. Every employee, from the janitors at LaGuardia to the executives in Silicon Valley, would attend sessions focused not just on customer service, but humanity. For the first time in aviation history, a for-profit airline grounded itself not for safety concerns, not for weather or maintenance, but for ethical reform. Danielle was invited to help design the training curriculum, drawing on her own experiences as a frequent traveler and professional working in tech consulting. Her input reshaped not only the sessions, but also the hiring practices and internal promotion criteria across the company. Employees who had once rolled their eyes at diversity training were now required to pass assessments, engage in one-on-one coaching, and participate in empathy-based role-play simulations. No exceptions. One former gate agent broke down in tears during her session, admitting she'd never realized how often she had subconsciously profiled passengers based on skin color or clothing. Another manager resigned on the spot, unable to reconcile his behavior with the footage he was forced to watch of himself, captured during previous customer complaints, now brought back into the light. Meanwhile, Stallone quietly funded a new initiative through his foundation, the Right to Sit campaign, a project aimed at identifying and challenging unjust travel policies across major airlines, hotels, and public transportation services. The campaign included a hotline, legal representation, and digital tools for passengers to record and report mistreatment. The slogan was simple: if you paid for it, you belong there. Danielle Harper was named its national ambassador. As all this unfolded, the three people at the center of the storm, Jessica, Trevor, and the lead security officer, faced very different outcomes. Jessica, the flight attendant, was terminated immediately after the board presentation. She issued a tearful statement on social media, apologizing publicly and acknowledging her role. She admitted that she had let assumptions guide her actions and that she failed a woman who deserved her protection, not her prejudice. Trevor's termination was less public, but no less final. Attempts to defend his actions as company protocol fell apart when confronted with surveillance that showed deliberate neglect. He had been promoted quickly in recent years, but now found himself blacklisted across multiple major carriers. The lead security officer, whose body cam revealed him rolling his eyes as he grabbed Danielle's arm, was removed from his position, sued civilly, and later charged with unnecessary use of force. He, too, apologized. But the public had already moved on. And yet, Stallone didn't call for lifelong ruin. In a surprising move, he announced that the Right to Sit campaign would also offer rehabilitation tracks for former employees found guilty of misconduct, if they admitted fault, showed willingness to learn, and completed a full year of community-based mentorship. Justice, Stallone said in a press conference, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about the hard work of becoming better. That statement, too, went viral. 6 months later, Skylux's reputation, once shattered, had begun to rebuild, not through marketing campaigns or flashy ad buys, but from real structural change. Customer satisfaction ratings among passengers of color increased by 48%. First-time flyers reported a more welcoming atmosphere. A mother from New Orleans emailed Danielle personally, saying, "My son is 12 and wants to be a pilot someday. For the first time, I believe he'll be treated like he deserves that dream." Danielle framed the letter. As for her, life had changed dramatically. She had become a symbol of dignity, under pressure, poise, in the face of humiliation, and courage born not from defiance, but from simply knowing her worth. She was interviewed by NPR, invited to speak at Yale, and eventually offered a role on Skylux's ethics board, which she accepted only after ensuring it wasn't just for show. "I won't be your mascot," she told them. "I'll be your mirror." On a quiet morning, exactly 1 year to the day of the incident, Danielle and Stallone reunited at LAX. There was no press, no crowd, just two people meeting for coffee before heading off to separate gates. "You look good," he said, grinning. "So do you," she replied. They sat in silence for a minute, watching passengers come and go. No one noticed them. No one looked twice. And that, they both knew, was exactly how it should be. Before they parted, Danielle said, "You changed everything that day." Stallone shook his head gently. "You did. I just refused to let them forget it."